When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk,
what's up, Student Nation? Welcome back to another episode, and it is going to be a packed episode. Hope you had a great Christmas, lighter schedule this week, posting-wise and so forth. So we're going to go heavy right here. We're going to start with football because, at Oklahoma, football always sets the temperature. I also like to say it pays the bills because the transfer portal, it's about to get up and running. You got some emotional, fast moving type things that are going to start happening here. And what looks maybe like chaos on the surface is actually something I think more revealing. What we're going to talk about is what this portal cycle is really telling us about the Brent Venables era and why this moment feels less like a crisis and more like a recalibration. And then we've got to shift to basketball. So we're going to go 2 and 2. First 2 segments, football. Last 2 segments, basketball, Thunder, and Sooners. Oklahoma quietly learning how to win with structure instead of flash. And we're going to dig into, obviously, Oklahoma City Thunder's. They've got a San Antonio problem. They've got a San Antonio problem. And we got to talk about what that Christmas Day loss actually taught, a young contender and defending champion. And then a big Russian name. I'm going to try to pronounce it in the final segment. Big arrival for Oklahoma hoops. But lot to unpack. So let's just get into this right now. So obviously, this is the Sooner Nation podcast, right? So we are Oklahoma fans. And so it's not hard for us to put ourselves in the shoes of an Oklahoma fan because that's exactly what we are. And the hardest thing to do in this era of football, college athletics, is to separate emotion from reality. That's not easy because of the transfer portal, especially not after losing in the first round of the college football playoff. And again, especially not when your phone feels like it's vibrating every 5 minutes with another name leaving this roster. It's loud, it's relentless, and it feeds into the most natural reaction that we have as fans, which is, man, this whole thing's just falling apart, isn't it? Because when you scroll through this list and you see names like Kobe McKenzie, Kendall Dolby, Javante Barnes, Jacob Sexton, those are names that have been big-time contributors. Then you got Isaiah Autry-Dent, Caden Helms, Jaden Gibson. So it doesn't feel like normal attrition. It feels almost like erosion. It feels a little bit like instability. But here's the reality that we have to come to terms with in this era, this modern era of college athletics. The transfer portal it's not a crisis. It's a mirror. And what it's reflecting back isn't chaos, it's intention. What we're watching right now is Oklahoma football in the middle of a philosophical shift. A shift that's going to, I think, ultimately define the Brent Venables era far more than any single win or loss or season ever could. So this isn't about losing players. It's about choosing a version of the program and understanding that not everyone fits the next version. Not everyone gets to take that next step. And that distinction matters. So you start with the departures because that's where the anxiety lives. And so on the surface, Oklahoma is shedding experience, veteran snaps, familiar names, leadership. And in a previous era, that would be alarming, right? Because depth was security, continuity was king. You hoarded bodies because development took time and mobility was limited. But that world doesn't exist anymore. What Oklahoma is doing now is roster compression, hard choice football in an unforgiving ecosystem. The staff, they're no longer interested in carrying depth for just the sake of comfort, right? They're chasing alignment between NIL value, on-field role, development timeline, schematic fit, and championship windows. And when those things don't align, you get separation. So take Kobe McKenzie, right? This is probably the clearest example that we have. His portal entry doesn't automatically mean dissatisfaction. It doesn't mean he's quitting on Oklahoma, and it certainly doesn't mean Oklahoma pushed him out. In 2025, right now in the modern era, entering the portal can mean one of three things. It can mean leverage, it can mean clarity, or it can just mean timing. Sometimes it may be all three. And we've seen this play out already. We've seen it happen with this current roster. I mean, David Stone tested the waters. He returned and he benefited. So the portal isn't a one-way exit anymore. It's a negotiation table, a place to assess value, a place to understand where you stand. But here's the other layer that we have to acknowledge as a fan base. Oklahoma's linebacker room is also changing stylistically. Brent Venables wants speed. He wants flexibility. He wants coverage ability. Those hybrid defenders who can stay on the field and space. And that's not a knock on anyone, but it's a schematic reality. And in that reality, the margins, they're pretty thin. And if you're not a guaranteed every down player, or if your best football doesn't align with where the defense is heading, the math gets uncomfortable, and it gets uncomfortable quickly. That doesn't mean that anything is wrong with who you are. It doesn't make, in this argument or this conversation, it doesn't make anyone wrong. It just makes the fit harder to justify. You look at the offensive line departures. I mean, look what's happened both in attrition to the NFL and the transfer portal. Again, we're not talking dysfunction. That's competition is what that is. Oklahoma is recruiting offensive linemen at a level it hasn't in years. You've got high ceiling prospects. You've got SEC ready bodies. You've got developmental players who 10 years ago would have waited their turn. They're no longer willing to do that. They're no longer required to do that. By the way, I've got a name coming up for you later on this week about the transfer portal and offensive linemen that could be coming in, whatever, teaser. But the portal gives people options. And Oklahoma, it gives them honesty. And honesty sometimes leads to exits. At the skill positions, the story gets even more clear. Wide receiver, tight end, attrition shouldn't surprise anyone who watched this offense closely. Production did not match expectation. Separation was inconsistent. And competition is about to intensify, and I think it's going to intensify dramatically. So Oklahoma, they're not rebuilding those rooms. What they're doing is they're retooling them, and they're retooling them rather aggressively. And I think that brings us to the more important part of this conversation. What Oklahoma is about to do, not what it lost. Because make no mistake, this portal cycle is going to define whether Oklahoma's transition into the SEC calendar, do they become a contender up another tier? Do they accelerate? Do they stall? And the Sooners know exactly where they have to strike. They know exactly where they have to start. I think wide receiver is at the top of that list. I think tight end is at the top of that list. We're going to talk about the tight end in the next segment, but we're not talking about depth. We're not talking about potential. We're talking about immediate impact players. That's the need. Oklahoma needs receivers who can separate against SEC corners. They need guys who can finish through contact and punish defenses that overplay the run. This isn't about gaudy stat lines. This is about stress. Alabama stresses you horizontally and vertically. Georgia does the same. Ole Miss does it with speed and with violence. And if Oklahoma wants to live in that neighborhood, it has to be able to apply the exact same pressure. You look at the offensive line, okay? This season proved Oklahoma can scheme around weakness, but not forever. In the SEC, you don't out-scheme dominant fronts for 4 quarters. Eventually, someone has to win one-on-one. Portal tackles, experienced interior linemen, players with real power for starts. That's where the value is. Not with projects, not with flyers. Solutions are found right there. And you can keep going on and going on. Linebacker, defensive back. That's where this portal, I think, is going to get kind of fascinating for Oklahoma defensively. Because, again, Venables believes in internal development. And he should. I mean, he's also pragmatic, though. One elite portal defender can stabilize an entire unit. One communicator can change alignment. One difference maker can raise the floor of everyone around him. So I wouldn't expect volume shopping here when this portal opens next week. I would expect precision. And now we get to the uncomfortable truth that we don't always want to hear as Sooner Nation. Some of the players leaving right now were part of the previous version of Oklahoma football, not the future version of Oklahoma football. Now, that doesn't erase their contributions. It doesn't diminish what they gave the program, and it really, if anything else, it contextualizes it. Because what Alabama did to Oklahoma last week in the playoff, by flipping the momentum, by imposing their own belief, by capitalizing on mistakes, that's exactly what Oklahoma did last month to Alabama. And you see this role reversal into the college football playoff, and that's something that matters. Because what it did was it exposed the final gap Oklahoma has to close, which is mental authority. The elite programs don't just reload talent, they reload belief. They replace players without losing identity. Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, we've talked about that. They've all moved on without blinking. Oklahoma's learning that lesson in real time. And yeah, the growing pains are loud. They're uncomfortable. They're magnified because the expectations are higher than they've ever been. But loud doesn't mean wrong. And this portal season isn't about Oklahoma falling behind. It's about Oklahoma deciding who it wants to be when the noise fades out. The Sooners are no longer chasing relevance. They're chasing sustainability. And sustainability at the highest tier of college football. And that pursuit requires difficult exits, awkward goodbyes, and confidence in what comes next. If Oklahoma nails this portal cycle, and history suggests that this staff is going to be aggressive, calculated, and unapologetic, then this offseason, it won't be remembered as a loss of control. It'll be remembered as a turning point. It's going to be a situation where the portal didn't weak Oklahoma. What it did was it exposed Oklahoma's ambition.
This episode is brought to you by McAfee.
Finish your fantasy lineup?
No, but I'm joining this paid group chat with insider info.
Dude, seriously? Forward it to me. Security alert from McAfee. That group's as legit as that knockoff jersey you're wearing.
McAfee's scam detector is available in all McAfee plans for as little as $39.99 for your first year. Learn more at McAfee.com/online protection.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like needing the protection of an offensive guard on the football field, but getting an elementary school crossing guard. Sure, they're both guards, but you can only trust one to keep your quarterback safe when the game is on the line. So don't settle for just any insurance when there's State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
All right, so I said I was going to give you a name. I'm going to give you a name here in just a second. If you follow us online, heartland-sports.com, if you're on our Facebook community, you've already seen this. But look, if Oklahoma's serious about becoming a program that controls the games in the SEC instead of merely surviving them, then, again, this transfer portal season and their next move, especially at tight end, I don't think it has to be a flashy one. It's got to be functional. It's got to be intentional, and honestly, a little bit boring. And I think when you look at Brody Foley, it makes so much sense. Now, I know there's guys out there saying, and they could be right. Okay, they could be right. Guys out there saying that Foley is going to come at a price tag that Oklahoma's not willing to pay. Maybe. But I know that Foley has interest in Oklahoma. I know Oklahoma has interest in Foley. And I know they've got to land a dude at this position. And I think he makes sense. And we'll see. I don't even know that Foley knows where he's going to be participating in spring football at this moment. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. I don't think there's any evidence at this moment to say one way or the other. Just being honest. But when you look at Brody Foley, definitely not a viral name. He's not climbing, he's not climbing the social media clicks, but he is the number one ranked tight end according to 247 Sports in the transfer portal. And you look at his journey, what he became at Tulsa last season, it aligns almost perfectly with what Oklahoma has been missing since leaving that comfort zone of the Big 12. So this isn't about chasing production. It's about correcting structure. So when you look at Foley's career, you see this guy going from being an afterthought to being an asset. He didn't follow the modern portal success story we've grown used to. He wasn't a day one contributor. He didn't transfer once and instantly pop. His time at Indiana was quiet. He's got 3 seasons, mostly special teams work, learning the position, learning the grind, and waiting for opportunity that never fully arrived. And so for most players, that's where the story ends. But instead, you got a guy who bet on development over hype and transfers to Tulsa. And I think that's a decision. Clearly, you look back, hindsight's 2020, it changed everything. Because suddenly he's getting real snaps, he's getting real responsibility, and he didn't just contribute, he became central. In 2025, he caught 37 passes for 528 yards, averaged over 14 yards per catch. He scored 7 receiving touchdowns and even added 2 rushing touchdowns. So that goes well beyond nice tight end production, which is, with all respect to Jaren Kinnick, that's what you got this year. You got nice production. But what you want is offensive weapon type production. And that's what he gives. And think about it, historically for Tulsa, that level of output for a tight end, it hasn't been seen in almost 2 decades. But the numbers alone, that's not the point. All right, the point is the translation here. All right? When Foley's role expanded, his game scaled with it. And that matters for what Oklahoma's looking for. Because here's the truth, and just being honest, Oklahoma's tight end problem, it's not about replacement. And this is where the conversation usually goes wrong. People ask, well, who's Oklahoma replacing? That's the wrong question. Oklahoma doesn't need to replace a player. Oklahoma needs to replace a function. Since entering the SEC ecosystem, the Sooners have repeatedly run into the same issue against physical defenses. Once timing breaks down and the perimeter gets squeezed, the offense doesn't have a stabilizer inside. There hasn't been a reliable presence who can stay on the field regardless of down and distance, win through contact over the middle of the field, block without help, and give the quarterback a margin for error when protection leaks. Now, in the Big 12, you could survive without that. In the SEC, you cannot. Perimeter speed alone doesn't sustain drives. SEC defenses are built to erase that. And that's where the tight end becomes, the offensive connector. They are the players who turn chaos into manageable situations and keep offenses from unraveling when momentum swings. And again, Oklahoma hasn't had that consistently. And when games tilted late last season, especially against elite competition, it's not because the playbook lacked answers. That's not why Oklahoma didn't make it to the next round of the playoffs. It was because the personnel on the field lacked answers. And so you've got a guy in Foley. Production's not accidental. It's informative. I mean, there's always skepticism around group of five production. Sometimes that skepticism is warranted, but I don't believe this is one of those cases. And the fact that he's so coveted by the power teams proves that point to me. A tight end averaging more than 14 yards per catch, he's not living on checkdowns. A tight end scoring 7 receiving touchdowns in a season is not an afterthought near the goal line. That efficiency points to traits that travel: route discipline, spatial awareness, trust from the quarterback, understanding leverage. Just as important, Foley wasn't a force-fed target either. He maximized limited opportunities, and that tells you he understands role value, which is one of the biggest predictors of portal success. Oklahoma doesn't need a tight end demanding 8 touches a game. The Sooners need a tight end who turns 3 touches into first downs and 1 busted coverage into 7 points. That's how SEC games, that's how playoff games are actually won. And there's an SEC geometry problem here. This is the part that doesn't get talked about enough. The SEC is designed to suffocate offenses that live outside the numbers. You got cornerbacks that are longer. You got safeties that are faster. You got linebackers that are disciplined enough to sit on RPOs without vacating their zones. A capable tight end, he changes that geometry. Suddenly, linebackers can't cheat downhill. Safeties, they hesitate before robbing routes. Play action becomes real instead of decorative. And defensive coordinators are forced to declare intentions earlier, which is where explosive plays are born. Alabama understands this. Georgia understands this. Ole Miss understands this. That's why I keep mentioning those 3, because they're still playing in the playoff. Again, this is another lesson. This is something that Oklahoma is still learning. And adding a tight end like Brody Foley, it wouldn't revolutionize the offense. What it's going to do is it's going to unlock the offense. And I think the portable is the only sustainable path to doing this, okay? This isn't about patience. This is about timing. Oklahoma doesn't need a high-ceiling freshman who can help them in 2 years. The Sooners need someone who can line up in September and block SEC edge defenders without needing help. Someone who can recognize coverage rotations on the fly. Someone who can hold up physically for an entire season. That profile almost never comes straight out of high school. So the portal provides maturity. It provides survivability. It provides scar tissue that shows of the battles that have been won. And so in Foley, you've got a guy who's already adjusted to role changes. He's already taken his hits. He's already proven that he can scale when responsibility increases. That's efficiency. That's not desperation. And no matter who's under center in 2026, Oklahoma's offense needs better answers against pressure. And good quality tight ends, they provide larger catch windows. They provide safer throwing lanes. They provide reliable third down options, red zone calmness. And I mean, I hate to keep beating the dead horse, but you go back to the playoff loss. The offense unraveled, not because it lacked talent, but because once Alabama seized the mental edge, there was no stabilizing presence over the middle to reset the game for Oklahoma. And we look at Ben Arbuck and we're like, dude, we're paying you all this money. What happened? Well, guess what? It's not a schematic flaw. What it is a personnel gap. And they need guys who can be these answers. They need guys who believe in culture over hype. And we think about portal additions, they don't just change depth charts, they change locker rooms. And, you know, guys from the portal like Foley, with that experience, they arrive with a level of humility. They block without glory. They accept the dirty work. They lead quietly because they know what it's all about in their final year. And in Oklahoma, you got a program navigating turnover and identity evolution. Those type of things really, really matter. So Oklahoma doesn't need another personality. They need balance. They need a ballast here. So here's my final thought on, as this, again, the portal opens up next week. This is a smart target for Oklahoma. Because it's not about chasing the biggest name in the portal, but we are talking about the number 1 ranked tight end. But it's about, again, the smartest decision. And Brody Foley represents the kind of addition that serious programs make when they understand what actually wins in the SEC: leverage, balance, control. And you look at the list of schools that are after him, and again, that validates that statement right there. So he's not a guy that's going to dominate headlines here in January during the portal season. But dang, by next October, he could be the reason Oklahoma sustains drives, finishes in the red zone with touchdowns, and plays offense from a position of authority instead of urgency. So no, they don't need just a tight end. They've got just tight ends on their roster already. They need this kind of tight end. And I think that's why Brody Foley belongs squarely on the Sooners portal board, not just on the board, but at the very top of it.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, so Oklahoma City, the Thunder have a San Antonio problem. I mean, here's a crazy stat. 3 losses to the same team in like less than 2 weeks. I think it's 11 days. This is a matchup with the Spurs that's going to demand more from this Thunder squad, which is a very good squad, I might add. But Christmas Day games, they're supposed to be statements. They're supposed to tell the league, you're not, who you are, not necessarily with bravado, but with authority. And for the Thunder, Wednesday afternoon at the Paycom Center, it was supposed to reinforce a story that they've been writing for 2 months: dominance, depth, discipline. I mean, the assurance that they are the top team in the West. But instead, what that game delivered was something far more uncomfortable. But maybe at the same time, something that's far more useful. Oklahoma City's 117-102 loss to the Spurs, it wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it wasn't super embarrassing. It was controlled, just not by the Thunder. And I think that's the part that lingers here, because this game, again, didn't expose an effort issue for Oklahoma City. It didn't expose talent gaps. It exposed something much more subtle and much more important. Who dictated the terms of the game? And again, it wasn't Oklahoma City. And, you look at 1 loss, yeah, you dismiss that. It's the NBA Cup. You look at 2 losses, well, you can rationalize that. It is second night of a back-to-back. But then you got 3 losses in a short span. That's a pattern. Now you've got a pattern. And San Antonio has now beaten Oklahoma City multiple times using the exact same blueprint: patience, spacing, size, and an absolute refusal to be sped up. The Spurs don't fear Oklahoma City's pressure. They don't panic against the ball pressure, the traps, the passing lane gambling. They actually welcome it. They absorb it, and then they bend the game back into a shape that they prefer. We've seen it 3 times. It's not luck. You can't say it's luck. You have to say, at this point, that's their identity. And on Christmas Day, the Thunder actually started well. They were sharp early. They were active defensively. They were aggressive in transition. But as the game settled, so did San Antonio. And by halftime, the Spurs had seized control, not with runs, but with repetition. Possession by possession, read by read, cut by cut. That's veteran basketball, regardless of age. And when the game slows, the answers matter. The most revealing stretches of this game, they didn't come during the Spurs' scoring burst. They came during the Thunder's stagnant moments. When Oklahoma City needed answers, when shots stopped falling, when driving lanes closed, when the margin hovered close enough to inspire belief, the Thunder didn't panic, but they didn't adapt quickly enough either. The ball just stuck. Spacing tightened, decisions slowed by half a beat. SGA, he still got his points because that's what elite players do. But this wasn't a game about his brilliance. It was about how comfortable San Antonio was living within SGA's brilliance. Right? So the Spurs didn't send chaos at Shea. They didn't overcommit. They trusted their structure and dared Oklahoma City's secondary options to tilt the game. And they didn't do that. They couldn't do that. There was no answer there. And that's the lesson. We talked about Oklahoma, the Sooners in the college football playoff, not having a talent problem. Guess what? The Thunder don't have a talent problem either. I mean, just be clear about this. The Thunder are not suddenly a flawed team. They're not overrated. They're not, quote, figuring it out. They're not regressing. What they're doing is they're entering phase 2 of contention. Phase 1 is surprise. Phase 2 is adjustment. Phase 3 is response. And Oklahoma City is firmly in phase 2. The Spurs didn't beat the Thunder because Oklahoma City lacked shooting, because the Thunder lacked toughness or depth. The Spurs beat the Thunder because they forced them into half-court precision battles, and then the Spurs won those battles. They executed cleaner. They maintained spacing under pressure. They punished small mistakes without forcing big risk. And that's how playoff series are going to be won. And until Oklahoma City consistently proves that it can dictate those moments, teams like San Antonio are going to remain dangerous. Not because they're better, but because they're comfortable in that environment. And don't get me wrong. I mean, again, as brilliant as they are offensively, the Thunder are still that brilliant defensively. But they've got to finish. This is an elite team with elite defense. None of that has changed by these 3 losses. But what has changed is the caliber of patience that they're facing. So San Antonio didn't dribble into traps. The Spurs didn't force passes. They waited for second and third actions, knowing that Oklahoma City thrives on disruption. And this game highlighted the next defensive evolution that I think the Thunder are going to have to make: possession completion. What that means is this: they got to finish rebounds. You got to communicate after the first breakdown. You got to stay disciplined when the initial advantage disappears. And the good news is those are not dramatic fixes, but then margins decide championships. So let's talk about why this loss is actually valuable. It's an uncomfortable truth for Thunder fans. They may not want to hear this. They definitely didn't want to hear it on Christmas night. But this loss actually may matter more than some of the early season wins. Let me tell you why. Because it reveals exactly what kind of team Oklahoma City still needs to become. So San Antonio didn't surprise the Thunder. They challenged them structurally. They didn't expose some sort of fatal flaw that Oklahoma City may have had, but what they did is they illuminated the gap between being excellent and being unstoppable. And that gap is where championships live. Now the Thunder have film that matters. They have possessions that matter. They have questions about themselves that matter. How do they generate offense late against size? Who becomes the secondary aggressor when SGA is contained? Which lineups maintain spacing under playoff pressure? How do they counter teams that refuse to speed up? Those aren't problems. Actually, what they are is they're prompts. And perspective is the separator here. It's still December. Oklahoma City remains among the most elite teams in the West. They still defend at a championship level. They still have the league's most reliable roster and closer, I might add. They still have real, tangible internal growth coming. So what's happening now, it's not slippage, it's calibration. Every contender goes through this stage. The great ones, they don't even avoid it, they absorb it. And San Antonio, intentionally or not, they've become Oklahoma City's sharpest teacher. Not because the Spurs are unbeatable, but because they play a style that forces clarity. And clarity, even when it costs you a Christmas Day win, it's a gift that contenders can't afford to ignore. Ignore? I don't know. Maybe I just had a stroke. The response is going to define, moving forward, that's what's going to define what this Christmas Day loss was about. The other two losses as well. Because the most important thing about this loss, it's not the score, it's the response. Do the Thunder refine their late game counters? Again, do they empower secondary creators earlier in the shot clock? Do they adjust defensive coverage to finish possessions? Do they embrace the discomfort of being hunted instead of, celebrated? If they do, then this loss becomes part of the foundation. If they don't, it becomes a big warning. But history and this team's DNA all suggest Oklahoma City will close growth over denial. And when April arrives, the lessons learned on Christmas Day, they may matter far more than what a final score, a final frustration, a Grinch stole Christmas type attitude ever did.
Here's my 30-second story with Guinness. As soon as my sister and I get home for the holidays, we don't even unpack. We head straight to our pub. The bartender already knows our order, Guinness and fries. We laugh all night, catch up with old friends, and walk home with faces sore from smiling. It's one of my favorite nights of the year. That was my 30-second story with Guinness.
Guinness Draft Stout. Please enjoy responsibly. Imported by Diageo Beer Company, USA, New York, New York.
Okay, so I'm nervous because I got to say a name that I don't know I'm going to pronounce it right. So we're going to practice together, and if we get it wrong, then we all get it wrong together. So you got Kirill Elatonsev. Kirill Elatonsev. I don't know. That's my best guess. All right, that's my best guess. But when Oklahoma learned this week that he was cleared by the NCAA and would be eligible to join this rotation, it didn't land like breaking news meant to dominate a late December, Christmas week news cycle. Honestly, it didn't feel like a splash. It felt like something quieter, more deliberate. And that's exactly why it matters, because this move tells you a lot about where Porter Moser's program actually is right now. Not where the fans might want it to be, not where the preseason expectations may have wandered, but where Oklahoma basketball understands it needs to grow. Elatonsev doesn't arrive with a mixtape designed for social media. He doesn't come with one and done buzz or a recruiting ranking that demands immediate attention. He arrives with professional minutes played, defensive habits already formed against grown men, I might add, and a resume that reads less like a prospect and more like a midseason reinforcement. And that's the distinction that's going to matter here, especially with conference play just kind of looming right there. This isn't for Oklahoma basketball. This isn't about chasing the ceiling. It's about really stabilizing the floor. And Oklahoma, they've made quiet progress, and that matters. You look at the last 2 weeks, you got a team that's quietly gaining traction. And you look back, I think really that Oklahoma State win, Kansas City after that, that one's not something that's going to be popping out on paper. But really what these wins are doing is they're revealing on film that the Sooners are playing with more structure. They're valuing possessions. They're defending without over-gambling. They're letting their guards dictate tempo instead of reacting to it. And that's progress. That's real progress. Xavier Brown, Nigel Pack, they've settled into roles as tone setters rather than shot hunters. Darian Reed's efficiency has turned him into a consistent problem for opposing forwards. Even Mohamed Wagi, who has anchored the defense with more consistency when his offensive numbers fluctuate. I guess what I'm saying is with Oklahoma basketball, what you see is a rhythm that's forming. But there's also a gap. And there's one that doesn't show up in blowouts. It appears against physical teams and disciplined front courts. Gonzaga, right? Oklahoma's interior depth has been functional, but not formidable. Wagi's been solid. Kai Rogers is trending upward. Cool attack. He brings length and energy, but none of them individually or collectively have been able to force opposing scouts to redraw their game plan in the paint. Kirill Elatonsev, he changes that conversation, and I don't know if I'll ever get his name right. But right now, he fits this program for where they are. I mean, his appeal is not built on projection. You're looking at a guy whose appeal is built on evidence. 6'11", 23 years old. He doesn't resemble a typical college big because he's not one. He's already played meaningful minutes in a high-level professional league. And I'm, Lokomotiv Kuban, it's a European league. But what you get here is experienced post player who has defended against professional experienced post players. He's navigated structured systems and he's learning how to stay on the floor, which a lot of guys right now can't do that. I don't want to call names, but you know who I'm talking about. So it's not a guy whose numbers are going to overwhelm anyone just skimming through a stat sheet. Roughly, 7 points a game, 4 rebounds, just over a block shot per game. But like everything else, this is a situation where context matters. The points come efficiently. The rebounds come in traffic. The blocks come without chasing. And I think most importantly, you're talking about a guy who is trusted. That's a skill that Oklahoma needs the most. The roster doesn't require a center who demands touches. It needs one who protects possessions, deters drives, and allows perimeter defenders to pressure the ball, knowing there's real size behind them. So you got a background here that suggests he understands all those responsibilities instinctively. He doesn't need to be featured. What he just needs to be is reliable. And there's temptation in December to evaluate teams based on what they've already done. Conference play is coming. And the SEC doesn't care what you did in November and December. This is a league that's going to test depth, physicality, and emotional composure, especially as you get into February. That's when the legs are heavy. That's when scouting reports are unforgiving. SEC basketball is relentless inside the paint. Every night brings another front court that wants to play through contact, force rotations, and wear opponents down. Oklahoma can compete on the perimeter with anyone in this league, but whether it can survive the paint remains the big question here. And so Elatonsev doesn't guarantee answers, but he does give Porter Moser options. He allows Oklahoma to absorb foul trouble without panic. He provides another body capable of defending true centers. He creates lineup flexibility that simply just doesn't exist a week ago here. And perhaps maybe most importantly, he raises the internal standard in practice. Players with professional experience, they tend to do that quietly through positioning, communication, and habits, really without ever having to say a word. So this is a program move, not a hype move. One of the kind of under the radar critiques of Porter Moser's early tenure has been roster balance. Oklahoma's often been kind of leaning towards a guard-heavy roster, relying on skill and pace to compensate for physical mismatches. And sometimes that's worked and sometimes it didn't. But the addition of this big dude suggests that we're looking at a recalibration. So this isn't Oklahoma chasing headlines or manufacturing excitement. It's Oklahoma acknowledging what the next phase of success is going to require and acting accordingly. So Kirill Elatonsev, he represents a bridge between where college basketball is going and what it already demands. That the sport is increasingly international, increasingly experienced, increasingly unforgiving to teams that can't match size, discipline, and maturity. Oklahoma didn't stumble into this move. Oklahoma pursued it. And then, again, something that matters there. But I think, as Sooner Nation, we tend to just go, pedal to the floor. I think I do think expectations should be grounded here. I think we can be optimistic, but it's important not to overinflate what this guy is going to be. He's not coming in to average a double-double. He's not going to dominate highlight reels. He's not the cure-all, but I think his impact is going to be quieter. I think you're going to see shot deterrence. You're going to see rebounding position. You're going to see lineup stability, and you're going to see a defensive calmness. But those are all margins that win conference games. If he adapts quickly to the pace and officiating of college basketball, then he could become the kind of player that fans don't fully appreciate until suddenly he's gone. The kind of player who doesn't need plays called for him to affect the game. Those are the players that decide seasons. Now, there's a bigger picture here. Oklahoma basketball feels like a program transitioning from rebuilding to refining. I think the pieces are there. The habits are improving. The wins are beginning to stack. And Elatonsev doesn't change Oklahoma's ceiling overnight. What he does is he raises the baseline. And in a conference like the SEC, that distinction often determines whether you're surviving conference play or competing every night with purpose and intent as a challenger. And in that sense, this move isn't really about one Russian big man joining the roster. It's about Oklahoma understanding exactly what it needs to take the next step and having the confidence to go out and to get it. That's how programs grow up. And for Oklahoma basketball, man, that probably is the most important development of all. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Sooner Nation podcast. Football is evolving. Basketball is finding its footing. Both programs are learning what it takes to compete with intention at the highest level. Look, if you enjoyed the conversation, please make sure to subscribe, make sure to leave a review, share it with another Sooner fan out there. We'll be back. We'll talk more perspective, more breakdown, more context. Until then, enjoy your weekend, everybody. Boomer Sooner.
I'm gonna be the man who's working hard for you.